and welcome back to another episode of Let's Read an Indie from the Writing Stickman. Before we continue, I would like to give a shout out to the Fellowship of the Indie Author, an online group that is, well, a fellowship of indie authors, an excellent resource for both authors and readers alike. Authors can share their struggles and what they're going through and can also plug their books. For readers, it is an excellent source for books you may want to read. Currently, pretty much everything I'm reading I've been finding through the Fellowship of the Indie Author, including the previous 2 books I have reviewed, and they've been very good, so I definitely recommend them as either an author or a reader. I shall be sharing links in the description below. And so, for today's book, we shall be looking at The Fate of the Three Crowns, a fantasy story by Nikole Callihan. So, what is Fate of the Three Crowns? Well, as I said, it's a fantasy story, but it's not a high fantasy story. It's not one with epic quests and massive battles. It has much more of a fairy tale-like feel to it, with a strong emphasis on the emotional journeys of the characters, including a romantic element, though I wouldn't consider it romantasy, not that I give much stock into these kind of labels. So, to begin, let us talk about the setup, and what a setup we have. Starting in a village, we learn that it is blessed by the Fae, with sheep bearing golden fleece. This blessing brings them wealth and sustains them. However, it comes at a cost. Every 100 years, a girl of the village must be sacrificed to the Fae. And we see all this in the beginning, as they near the sacrifice through the eyes of Lyra, and Lyra is in the most unfortunate position of being the girl selected by her village to be the sacrifice. And this is one of the most captivating things about the story early on, is how you are drawn in by Lyra. It's a brilliant way of bringing you into the world, because I felt a deep empathy for her, as she is put in this really unfair position. She wants to live, she doesn't want to die, and yet she exudes a real bravery in facing what is being imposed upon her, the loss of her life, of her future. You feel sorry for her. I felt protective of her as she went to her end. And so Lyra is parted from her family, from her loved ones, her mother and sisters, one of her sisters even giving her a little carved sheep with golden fleece, just like those that the village subsists on. And with that, she is led to the place of sacrifice. And it's not an altar or a stone on which she's going to be killed. Instead, what happens is a fairy ring appears within the village, and she must step into it. And as she does, she is taken away from the world of humans and transported into the realm of the Fae. And so she is transported and arrives in the middle of a forest within the Fae realm, inside a summoning circle of stones. But she is not alone, as it is not just her village that sacrifices to the Fae, but there are 5 in total, and as a result, 4 other girls appear within the summoning circle, 4 strangers to her. These 5 girls, Lyra, Kinsley, Dices, Wren, and Jade, will form the core and heart of the story as we follow them. At first, we don't really know them. They're strangers to us as they are strangers to Lyra, but gradually throughout the story we will learn a lot about their personalities and the clashes and friendships that they will form. Eventually, the girls find themselves in the palace of the southern courts of the Fae realm. Everything is grand and different, but also unwelcoming. They're clearly not part of this world, and they're just inherently in danger by existing within this world, though we'll touch more on that later. Eventually they meet and are welcomed in a manner by the 3 Fae brothers who rule the southern courts. Initially they come off as rather unwelcoming in truth. Elion, the High King, seems more disinterested in everything and everyone than anything else, Riven is more concerned with the potential war with the northern courts and wishes to prepare and scheme for such things. And Lysander is so wrapped up in sticking to tradition and ritual to see anything else. Faced with the seeming lack of empathy from the brothers in the face of their plight, it's not until they meet a different lord of the Fae, not one of the brothers, that they actually get some help. And that is Keegan, a lord of the Wild Courts. So, while the five girls form the human characters of the story, it is Eleon, Riven, Lysander, and Keegan who form the majority of the Fae characters. Non-human beings magically connected to this realm in different ways. As always, I like to get through this section pretty quickly as I don't like to dwell on the negatives. I think one of the most important things that stuck out to me was there are a few occasions when time seemed to be confused in the writing, not necessarily in the story. I think the most obvious situation was there was a point when Keegan conjured up a magical lark to lead him to Dices. What confused me about that was, from the way it was written, he had only just left Dices in the library, and while he went and had a detour, the lark led him back to the library where she was. It was just a bit odd for me to read, and I even backtracked to make sure I was getting it correct. I think another aspect was I wasn't entirely clear on the age bracket of the girls at the beginning, but it became very apparent to me that they were obviously of a certain level of maturity considering the romantic angle that was developed later on in the story. The wild magic is crucial to this story and lends so much to it. The wild magic is something like a force that permeates the Fey realm. It runs through everything, and it's the means by which the Fey brothers and others like them perform their magic and conjure things like the aforementioned lark. However, it is also a source of terrible dread for the girls. As I mentioned before, merely existing in the Fey realm is a danger to them, and that's because the wild magic drives humans mad. Over time, they will gradually lose themselves and lose their minds. And this forms the core motivation for the girls. The fact that this terrible, inevitable doom constantly hangs over them at all times, threatening to take away their memories, their minds. The reminder that they are a sacrifice, that they will lose everything. But despite this, the Fey brothers seem to show little empathy or concern over the fate of the girls, which feels so harsh for them, making their situation even worse. And this desperation to find an answer, to find any kind of hope that they may be able to keep hold of their minds, forms a core part of the narrative and an excellent motivator for what happens. And added to this, the wild magic is causing a problem for the Fey realm itself in that it is weakening and causing the realm to deteriorate in a way. Now, it's not weakening in a way that will help the girls. They are still doomed to lose their minds. But the wild magic is causing a problem for both the human and the Fey characters. And for the Fey brothers, they do not know what is happening. As such, the wild magic hangs over everything that happens within this book. I would also like to make a couple of little interesting observations that I have noted. One of them being that it feels like an inversion the way that the Fey realm and the human realm are represented, in that all of the human characters are female and the Fey characters are male, whereas normally I would expect in a lot of other literature for the Fey realm to be more of the feminine and the human realm to be more of the masculine, but here it's swapped around, and it makes for quite an interesting little inversion to expectations. And another little thing that the story actually got me thinking of was Shakespearean stories, not in the language and the style in which it's written, but more in the enclosed nature with the characters. It reminded me of things like, the obvious one is Midsummer Night's Dream with regards to content, but I was thinking a lot more along the lines of Love's Labour's Lost, and perhaps something else like Twelfth Night. It was just interesting that this book reminded me of such things. So, in conclusion, what do I think? Well, it was a good, solid, emotional story that definitely makes you feel things at times. Especially for me, it was empathy with Lyra, but all of the characters get time to develop and show what they're made of. It's a standalone story. However, if the author ever wants to return and give us some more time with the characters, I'd definitely be interested in finding out, especially with what happens to them after the events at the end of the book. Nikole has also written another book, Lies, Love, Death, Fate, which I probably will be picking up at some point to see what happens there. And before we go, if you're interested in epic high fantasy, allow me to plug my own book, The Cube, Book 1 of the Mushroom Knight series, and let me show you the cover up nice and close. Oh yes, isn't that nice? It is available from Amazon on Kindle and paperback, and also on Kindle Unlimited. You will be able to find links in the description below. Well, that about wraps it up, so until next time, thank you for watching.